Silent honor, the Brotherhood's response. Your kind isn't welcome here. Too disruptive. Take your business elsewhere, the bar owner snarled, gesturing toward the door with a dismissive flick of his wrist. Nathan, Frost, Sullivan sat motionless, his untouched beer gathering condensation. He hadn't spoken a word, hadn't caused the slightest disturbance, just observed quietly from his corner table, a habit from 15 years of service that proved impossible to break. Disruptive? Frost finally asked, his voice calm but winter cold. I haven't even finished my first drink. The owner merely jerked his thumb toward the exit. Out. Before I make you leave. Frost's eyes met the owner's for one long moment. Something dangerous flickered behind his steel blue gaze, then vanished, replaced by resignation. He stood, left his beer, and walked out without another word. 24 hours later, as the bar prepared for its happy hour crowd, the front door swung open. Not one figure stood in the doorway, but 12. 12 men with the same unmistakable bearing as Frost. And they weren't leaving until they delivered a message. The invisible weight. Nathan Sullivan was trying to find his footing in a world that felt utterly foreign. After 15 years as a Navy SEAL, years of high-stakes operations in hostile territory and unbreakable bonds forged through shared danger, civilian life felt wrong, like clothing that didn't quite fit. His honorable discharge 3 months ago had come after his last mission left him with injuries that even his iron will couldn't overcome. The doctors had used phrases like cumulative trauma and long-term rehabilitation, but all Frost heard was that his time serving alongside his brothers had ended. He'd drifted to Harborview, a bustling coastal town where he hoped the familiar scent of salt air might ease his transition. He'd rented a Spartan room above a fishing supply store, spending his days walking the shoreline and his nights, well, that was the problem. The nights stretched endlessly, silent in a way combat zones never were. What few people understood about special operators like Frost wasn't their capacity for violence, it was their hyper-awareness, their constant assessment of surroundings. Even now, sitting in civilian clothes in a half-empty bar called the Anchor's Rest, his mind automatically catalogued exits, potential threats, defensive positions. Not out of fear, but from training so deeply ingrained it had become instinct. Frost didn't match the Hollywood image of a SEAL. He wasn't bulging with muscles or covered in tactical gear. At 5'10" with a lean build, watchful gray-blue eyes, and short brown hair, he could have been anyone, an accountant, perhaps, or a teacher. He preferred it that way. Anonymity was safety. Low profile meant survival. Tonight, wearing faded jeans, a plain navy t-shirt, and well-worn boots, he came to the Anchor's Rest seeking normalcy, just a quiet corner to enjoy a beer and observe the ebb and flow of regular life. But Victor Hargrove had other ideas. The owner's grudge. Victor Hargrove had owned the Anchor's Rest for 22 years. A stocky man with perpetual stubble and small, distrustful eyes, he prided himself on what he called running a tight ship. In practice, this meant enforcing arbitrary rules based on his mood and prejudices. Hargrove harbored a particular dislike for military personnel. Years ago, a minor altercation involving rowdy young sailors had left him with a chipped tooth and wounded pride. Over time, this isolated incident had festered in his mind, transforming into a deep-seated animosity toward anyone who carried themselves with military bearing. When Frost entered the Anchor's Rest that Tuesday evening, Hargrove's eyes narrowed immediately. Something about the quiet stranger set off alarm bells, the careful way he selected his seat, back to the wall, clear sightline to the door, the measured movements, the alert stillness. Hargrove didn't see a man seeking a peaceful drink, he saw a threat to his authority. For 20 minutes, Frost sat undisturbed, nursing his beer and studying the faded nautical maps decorating the walls. The bar was nearly empty, just a few regulars hunched over their drinks, a couple at a corner table, and a bored bartender scrolling through his phone. That's when Hargrove decided to act. He approached Frost's table with heavy steps, arms crossed over his chest, expression already hostile. "All right, buddy," he began, voice unnecessarily loud in the quiet space. "You've been sitting here staring for 20 minutes. Casing my establishment or something?" Frost looked up, genuinely surprised by the confrontation. "Just enjoying my beer. Thinking. Thinking. Hargrove scoffed. Don't like your kind of thinking in my place. Makes the customers nervous. He glanced around pointedly, though the few patrons were studiously ignoring the exchange. My kind? Frost asked, voice still calm, though something dangerous stirred behind his eyes. And what kind would that be? Hargrove leaned closer, his beer-soured breath washing over Frost. The quiet, intense, military-looking kind. You guys are always trouble. Looking for fights, thinking you own the place. I've had enough of it. His voice rose. Your kind isn't welcome here. Too disruptive. Frost raised an eyebrow. Disruptive? I haven't spoken to anyone but the bartender. Haven't moved from this table. Doesn't matter, Hargrove snapped, face reddening. I know your type. You're all the same. I run a respectable place here. So finish whatever swill you're drinking and take your business elsewhere. Frost placed his glass down with deliberate care. The injustice of it, the sheer irrational prejudice, gnawed at him. After everything he'd seen and done in service to his country, to be judged so carelessly by this belligerent bar owner based on nothing more than a perceived look, it was a bitter pill. I believe, Frost said, his voice still low but now carrying an edge of steel that made Hargrove pause briefly, that I am a paying customer, bothering no one. I believe I have the right to finish my drink in peace. Hargrove's brief hesitation vanished, replaced by renewed aggression. He slammed his meaty hand on the table. You believe wrong, buddy. This is my bar, my rules. And my rule says you're out. Now. Before I and my doorman, he jerked a thumb toward a large, equally thuggish man now watching from behind the bar, escort you out personally. Frost looked from Hargrove to the doorman and back again. He could handle both without breaking a sweat, 15 years of training made that a certainty. But what would it accomplish? A messy brawl, police involvement, legal troubles he didn't need while trying to build a new life. Not worth it. The familiar weight of resignation settled over him. This was civilian life, apparently, arbitrary, illogical, and often deeply unfair. He stood slowly, pushing in his chair. He left his barely touched beer on the table. Keep the change, he said quietly, though he hadn't paid yet. As he walked toward the exit, Hargrove called after him, and don't come back, you hear? We don't need your kind of trouble. Frost didn't look back. He stepped into the cool evening air, the injustice coiling in his gut. Walking a few blocks, he stopped at the seawall, staring out at the dark water. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police. Didn't call a lawyer. Instead, he opened a secure messaging app, one used by his old SEAL team for discreet communication, and typed a brief message to his former team leader, Commander Jack "Phantom" Reynolds. Anchor's Rest, Harborview. Owner Victor Hargrove. Unwarranted ejection, hostile to military. Just FYI. Frost. He hit send, not expecting anything to come of it. It was just an FYI, a way of venting to the only people who might understand. Then he began the long walk back to his rented room, the taste of injustice far more bitter than any beer. But what Frost didn't know was that his simple message had set something in motion. Something quiet. Something implacable. Something that would soon remind Victor Hargrove about the meaning of respect. The response. The next day, at precisely 3 p.m., Victor Hargrove was unlocking the front door of the Anchor's Rest, preparing for the afternoon shift and congratulating himself on keeping his establishment clean. That's when the first black SUV pulled up. It parked with military precision directly across from the bar's entrance. The engine remained running as the doors opened. Then came another identical SUV. And another. Hargrove paused, key still in the lock, a flicker of unease stirring in his chest. These weren't delivery vehicles or tourists looking for parking. Figures emerged from the vehicles, not one or two, but a dozen men. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, t-shirts, boots, some with baseball caps pulled low, but there was nothing civilian about their bearing. Each man moved with purpose, with the contained power of coiled springs, with the watchful eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. They crossed the street in a loose tactical formation, heading directly, silently toward the Anchor's Rest. Commander Jack "Phantom" Reynolds led the way, his weathered face unreadable but radiating an intensity that made Hargrove's unease blossom into full-blown apprehension. Behind him walked 11 other members of Frost's former SEAL team, men who had fought alongside Nathan Sullivan in some of the world's most dangerous places, men who had bled with him, who had saved his life and had their lives saved by him in return. They didn't look at other pedestrians or shops. Their collective focus was singular, the man standing in the doorway of the Anchor's Rest. Phantom stopped directly in front of Hargrove, the other 11 SEALs fanning out slightly behind him, effectively blocking the entire entrance. They didn't speak. They simply stood there, their collective gaze fixed on Hargrove, a silent, overwhelming wall of disapproval. Hargrove swallowed hard, his earlier bluster gone. Can I help you gentlemen?" he stammered, aiming for a welcoming tone that emerged as a nervous squeak. Phantom didn't answer immediately. He just looked at Hargrove, his eyes seeming to strip away every layer of the bar owner's bravado, leaving him feeling exposed and inadequate. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken threat. The doorman, who had just arrived for his shift and witnessed the team's arrival, wisely chose to remain near the back of the bar, suddenly very interested in polishing glasses. "Victor Hargrove?" Phantom finally asked, his voice low and calm but carrying the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. "Why yeah, that's me," Hargrove managed. "We understand," Phantom continued, his tone still measured, "that you had a misunderstanding last night with one of our associates. A man named Frost." Hargrove's eyes darted nervously between Phantom and the other silent figures. "Misunderstanding? Look, he was being difficult. I just asked him to leave. No harm done." One of the SEALs behind Phantom, a giant of a man known as Titan, let out a soft sound, not quite a laugh, more like the rumble of distant thunder. It made Hargrove flinch. "No harm done," Phantom echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You insulted him. You threatened him. You ejected him from your establishment based on nothing more than prejudice. Is that your standard business practice, Mr. Hargrove? To disrespect a man who has served his country with more honor and integrity in one mission than you've likely shown in your entire life?" Hargrove began to sweat. "Now hold on a minute. I support the troops. I've got a flag out front. Sometimes you just get a bad vibe from someone, you know." "A bad vibe," Phantom repeated, voice flat. "Interesting. Because we're getting a very specific vibe from you, Mr. Hargrove, and from your establishment." He paused. "We were planning on having a team gathering here this afternoon. About 12 of us. Maybe more might join. We thought we'd sample your hospitality. Have a few rounds. Support a local business." He glanced around the empty bar. "But given Frost's experience, we're reconsidering." Hargrove's mind raced. 12 SEALs in his bar for hours, the potential profit warred with the palpable sense of intimidation. But one look at Phantom's eyes told him this wasn't about selling beer. "Look," Hargrove said, trying a different approach, forcing a placating smile. "If there was a misunderstanding, I apologize. To Frost, to all of you. Tell you what, first round's on the house, for the confusion." Phantom's expression didn't change. "An apology to us is irrelevant, Mr. Hargrove. It's Frost you disrespected. And more than Frost, you disrespected the service, the sacrifice, the quiet dignity of a man who asked for nothing but to be treated like any other customer." He stepped closer. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Hargrove. You are going to find Frost. You are going to offer him a sincere, personal apology, not for us, but for him. You will tell him he is welcome in your establishment any time, and that he will be treated with the respect he is due." Phantom continued, "Then, you are going to make a substantial, publicly acknowledged donation to the Navy SEAL Foundation in Frost's name. Consider it an investment in better community relations." Hargrove looked horrified at the mention of a donation. A donation? How much are we talking about? Enough to make a difference, Phantom said smoothly. Enough to show you understand the gravity of your misunderstanding. My associate here, he gestured to Almanac, the team's medic, who also happened to have a keen mind for figures, will discuss the appropriate amount with you privately. Phantom then looked past Hargrove into the bar. And from now on, Mr. Hargrove, this establishment will be known as a place that honors veterans, not just with a flag out front, but with genuine respect. Understood? Hargrove, thoroughly cowed, could only nod mutely. Good, Phantom said. Now, about that apology to Frost. He pulled out his phone. He's expecting your call. We'll wait. For the next hour, the Anchor's Rest was effectively, though unofficially, under new management. While Almanac had a very quiet, very persuasive conversation with Victor Hargrove in his cramped office about donation figures and community outreach, the rest of the SEAL team simply occupied the bar. They didn't order anything. They didn't cause a disturbance. They simply sat at various tables, their presence an overwhelming silent statement. Regular customers who wandered in took one look, felt the atmosphere, and quickly turned around. Victor Hargrove, emerging from his office looking pale and significantly poorer, made a very heartfelt, very public phone call to Frost, apologizing profusely and inviting him back to the bar anytime as an honored guest. Frost, from his small room, accepted the apology with quiet grace. The SEAL team departed as silently and efficiently as they had arrived, leaving Victor Hargrove to contemplate his new business philosophy. The aftermath. The Anchor's Rest did, in fact, make a very substantial donation to the Navy SEAL Foundation, and word spread quickly through Harborview. The bar was now a veteran-friendly establishment, perhaps the most veteran-friendly establishment in town. 1 week later, Frost visited the Anchor's Rest at Phantom's insistence. Victor Hargrove personally served his beer, on the house, and couldn't have been more solicitous. Even the doorman nodded respectfully. Frost didn't gloat. He simply enjoyed his beer in peace, a quiet smile playing on his lips. He knew his team always had his back, whether in a war-torn foreign land or a rundown waterfront bar. The incident became a quiet legend among SEALs, a reminder that sometimes the most effective operations required no weapons, just unwavering loyalty and the undeniable presence of a dozen of America's finest warriors. Because brotherhood doesn't end with discharge. And when you mess with one SEAL, you might just find his entire team showing up to politely, but very firmly, recalibrate your understanding of respect. What most civilians never understand about special operators isn't their capacity for violence, it's their unbreakable bond of brotherhood. In a world that often fails to recognize the invisible wounds of war, they still stand together. Silent. Watchful. Loyal beyond measure. And ready to remind the world, one bar owner at a time if necessary, what honor truly means. Author's note: this story is dedicated to all who serve in silence, and to the bonds that don't break when the uniform comes off.